Thanks. Thanks for tuning in to episode 2, The 4 Life Pillars. My name is Marc Messinger, and you can find all these recordings and resources at mylifetransitionsguide.com. And I'm really glad you're here. You know, if you're listening to this, there's a good chance life has felt unstable lately. You know, not dramatically broken, just off. You know, like the ground underneath you isn't as solid as it used to be. And when that happens, most people don't need motivation. They don't need advice. They don't need someone telling them what they should do next. They need something quieter, something that helps them slow things down, organize the chaos, and begin trusting their own judgment again. Because I have been there where I don't trust myself. And that's what this recording is about. You know, I'm not here to ask you to trust me. I'm here to offer a simple framework, one that has helped me personally and professionally, that helps people start trusting themselves again. You know, let me explain it to you this way. All of us have been in a park and seen one of those pavilions. You know, the one where maybe you've been under for a birthday party, a graduation, a family celebration. You know, it's just 4 pillars and a roof. And you go under that pavilion because it provides shade, protection, a sense of safety. And if you notice, you're underneath there, and if one of the pillars in the 4 corners, it doesn't look quite perfect, you still feel okay standing under it. But, you know, especially if the weather starts to change. But, you know, now imagine something different. You're standing under that pavilion, maybe eating some birthday cake, and you look around, you realize that 2 or 3 of the pillars are cracked. You know, and if a storm clouds now start to roll in, you're not going to stay there. You're going to run to your car because suddenly that structure that you're under, it isn't protecting you anymore. And that's exactly how life works too. That pavilion is your life. And the 4 pillars that are holding up that pavilion are health, family, purpose, and finances. And when one pillar weakens, the whole structure feels unsafe, even if the others are still standing. And the goal isn't to fix everything at once. The goal is to really just identify which of your pillar needs attention first. So we're going to talk about those 4 pillars and health. Health is always the first pillar that I talk about because without it, most of the time, nothing else works. And your health really has 2 sides. You have physical health and you have a mental or emotional health. You know, in episode 1, I mentioned, watching World War II vets when I was up at Mayo Clinic and how when their bodies failed or when their minds failed, it changed the entire trajectory of their lives. And it did the same thing when I was sick also. And the same thing will happen to you. When you're exhausted, overwhelmed, anxious, just not sleeping, every decision feels heavier than it should. Especially if you're in grief or caregiving, health is often the first thing that is sacrificed. People stop sleeping. They skip meals, or even worse, they eat junk food. They live on adrenaline. And this isn't about fitness goals. It's just about capacity. You know, if your nervous system is overloaded, clarity is just impossible. The second pillar I want to talk about is family. And this one needs a little bit of clarity because family is not just your blood. Family is your crew. It's the people that show up for you. It may be somebody, a neighbor, somebody in your church, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a family member. It's the people that you lean on, the people that you protect, and the people that you feel responsible for. And here's a pretty hard truth. Family can help you, and family can hurt you. Not because they're bad people, but because of stress, fear. Pain really does change family dynamics. And being family does not mean giving unlimited emotional access to you. Loss, illness, and caregiving really strains this pillar deeply because if you've got family you're working with, your roles change, the expectations shift, and silence many times creeps in. And sometimes this pillar cracks not because of conflict, but because no one is saying out loud how hard things really have become. Stability here often begins with permission to say, this is hard. I don't have to carry this burden alone, and I'm going to have to find some people that can help me with this pillar. The third pillar I want to talk about is purpose. And this one's very personal to me because I have seen it on my Facebook groups that I belong to, helping others. And I've seen it in my office meeting with people. And this purpose pillar, it's often misunderstood. Many people think that their purpose is, hey, I take care of my family, Mark. I am taking care of a sick loved one. My purpose is all around the job I've had for 10, 20, 30 years. But let me be very clear with you. Those are not purpose. Those are responsibilities. Purpose is what makes you wake up in the morning. For me, my family is the foundation of my life. It's the reason I do everything. But my purpose goes a little bit deeper. I realized one day when I was in survival mode after the hurricane of losing my wife, and I was sitting in my office one day and I go, Lord, what is my purpose? And I just wrote down these words one day, that I have a servant's heart. And that's what matters to me. That's my purpose, but it may not be your purpose. And here's why finding a purpose is so important. If your entire purpose is wrapped up in a person, someday that person may not be there. And if your entire purpose is wrapped up in something like a job, I guarantee you someday that job won't be there. And if your purpose disappears when something external disappears, a loss of a loved one or a job, it was never anchored deeply enough. And if you don't know your purpose, that is absolutely okay, because one thing that we all have now in this year is everyone has a supercomputer in your pocket. You can ask it questions all day long and it costs you nothing. You can go on Google. You can ask questions. You can reflect. You can ask artificial intelligence even as a thinking partner to explore what brings you meaning. You can go on to tons of YouTube videos. Purpose doesn't mean passion or productivity. What purpose mean, it will give you orientation. And in survival mode, your purpose can be small. Hey, I just need to get through the day. I just need to show up. I just need to take one small, simple step. That can be your purpose today. Purpose doesn't need to be inspiring. It just needs to be true. So let's go back to that pavilion. If 2 or 3 of those pillars are cracked, of course you don't feel safe standing there. The work isn't in rebuilding the entire structure overnight. The work is really in just stabilizing one simple pillar at a time. And the fourth pillar we're going to talk about is finances. And in my experience, this is usually the loudest pillar, but rarely the first one that actually needs attention. Money gets loud because decisions are forced. Death and taxes are the absolutes in this world, but guess what? Bills always show up. From the moment that you're, an adult 18 plus till the day you die, bills never stop. Benefits have deadlines. Care costs can escalate, and your income can change, sometimes overnight. A loss of a job, retirement, or care costs for taking care of somebody and moving them, income can just be an overnight change. And when the other pillars are cracked, those financial decisions feel absolutely urgent, even panicked. And here's what I've learned over time in my day job. I'm a financial advisor and I sit across from people one on one, sometimes in small groups of 10, and I've taught classes in rooms of 100. And again, I've seen the same pattern. When people are exhausted, when family dynamics are strained, when purpose feels unclear, financial clarity is the hardest thing to achieve. And that's why rushing financial decisions and emotional fog so often later leads to regret. Not because people are careless, but because their foundation isn't steady yet. But here's a quiet truth I want you to hear. Once the other pillars are stabilized, even just a little, the financial pillar is often the fastest one to repair. And clarity returns quickly when the noise dies down. And if someday you decide you need expert guidance, well, that's okay, but you probably don't need it today. But this work isn't about trusting me or any professional. It's about helping you trust yourself enough to know when to pause, when to listen, and when to ask for help. This framework is shaped by my background in behavioral finance and human decision making. That's the lens I've spent my professional life working through. But these recordings aren't about my day job. They exist to support you right where you are. If at some point you're curious about my professional background, you're welcome to look me up on your own. But this space stands on its own. People have told me, whether in rooms of 100, 10, or one-on-one, that this framework helped them still feel steadier again, not because they trusted me, but because it helped them, really start to trust themselves. You can find the rest of these recordings and resources at mylifetransitionsguide.com. In the next episode, we'll talk about moving from survival to stability and why that transition takes longer than most people expect. For now, notice the structure, notice the pillars, and take the next small step. It's a good life.